Hello everyone. Before we jump in, make sure to hit like, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. That way, YouTube knows to keep sharing more stories like this with you. Now, let's get started. I still remember the first time I got a call like that. I was new to the job, still green, still trying to figure out how to carry myself in uniform. Most of the calls before then had been small things, arguments between neighbors, a few traffic stops, the sort of stuff they ease you into so you get used to it without being completely thrown into the fire. I thought I was ready for anything, but I wasn't. Not even close. The day started like any other. It was late fall, one of those gray days where the clouds hang low, and it looks like it could rain but never does. The air was cool and damp, and the leaves that were still clinging to the trees were brown and lifeless. I remember pulling into the station lot that morning, coffee in hand, and thinking it was the kind of weather that made you feel tired even before the day began. I had no idea that by the end of it, that same heavy sky and damp air would feel burned into me forever. We got the call around midday. An older lady phoned in, her voice shaky, saying her husband had gone outside to cut wood earlier and hadn't come back for lunch. She sounded worried in that way, where you can tell it's not just about someone being late. There was something in her voice, something that told me she already knew something was wrong even if she didn't want to say it out loud. I didn't think much of it at first. People wander off, lose track of time, or just need space. But my training officer, the deputy I was riding with, didn't brush it off. He'd been doing this job a long time, and I could tell by the way he nodded at the radio and told dispatch we'd head over that he expected this was going to be more than a simple check-in. The drive out there wasn't far, maybe 20 minutes from town, but it felt longer. The road wound out into the country, past bare fields and stretches of woods. Old barns and farmhouses dotted the land, some lived in, some falling apart. The house we were headed to sat off a gravel road, tucked back behind some trees. It was a small place, plain but tidy, the kind of house you'd expect to see an older couple in. The yard was scattered with tools, buckets, an old tractor parked near a shed. I noticed the woodpile right away, a decent stack that had clearly been worked on recently. The barn sat behind it, old wood siding faded to gray, roof sagging just a little in the middle. His wife met us at the door. She was thin, her face lined and pale, with worry written all over her. She said he'd gone out mid-morning, that he'd been out there plenty of times before, that he wasn't moving quickly these days because of his illness, and she just didn't understand why he wouldn't have come in by now. I could see the fear behind her eyes. She knew her husband better than anyone, and something inside her told her this wasn't right. We walked out to the barn together. The gravel crunched under our boots. The air was still, so quiet that all I could hear was the sound of our steps. The closer we got to the barn, the more I felt that strange weight pressing down, like my body was trying to warn me of what was waiting inside. My training officer walked ahead, steady like he'd done this kind of thing 100 times before. I trailed behind him, trying to keep my nerves in check, trying to look like I belonged there. The barn doors weren't closed all the way. They were cracked just enough to let in a slice of gray light. My training officer pushed one open, and we stepped inside. At first, all I saw was dust floating in the light, beams of it catching in the air, old tools leaning against the walls, piles of lumber stacked off to the side. Then my eyes adjusted, and I saw him. He was hanging from a rafter in the middle of the barn. The rope was tight around his neck, his body still, his head tilted at an angle that didn't look natural. His skin had a grayish cast, his face slack, eyes half open but empty. It was the first time I'd ever seen someone like that in person, and it hit me harder than I expected. My stomach dropped, and I froze where I stood. My training officer didn't. He just let out a short breath, almost like he'd been expecting it, and walked straight over. I forced myself to move, every step heavy, my boots echoing on the barn floor. The closer I got, the worse it was. His neck was stretched from the weight of his body, longer than it should have been. His feet and ankles were swollen and dark, the blood pooling down there. It didn't look real. It looked like something out of a picture you didn't want to see, the kind that stays in your head whether you want it to or not. I could feel my throat tighten and my hands tremble, but I tried to push it down. I had to. I was supposed to be here, supposed to handle things like this. My training officer pulled out his knife and looked at me. He told me to grab the man's thighs so he wouldn't just hit the ground when the rope was cut. I hesitated for a second, then stepped forward and reached out. His jeans were stiff, cold to the touch. I wrapped my arms around his legs, the weight of him pressing into me. I could feel just how heavy he was, dead weight in the truest sense. It made my chest tighten even more, but I held on. The knife sawed through the rope, and when it finally gave way, his whole body slumped onto me. The sudden weight nearly knocked me over. I staggered but managed to hold him up for a second. That's when it happened. The air that had been trapped inside him rushed out as his body collapsed. It forced through his throat and voice box, coming out in a sound I'll never forget. It wasn't just a breath. It was a moan, long and loud, deep and raw, like something torn out of the earth itself. It echoed in the barn, filling the space, bouncing off the walls. It sounded alive even though he wasn't. It sounded like he was crying out, like some part of him was still in there. I screamed without meaning to, pure reflex, and I let go. His body dropped hard onto the barn floor with a dull thud. The sound cut off instantly, leaving nothing but silence. I stood there, chest heaving, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I felt sick, my stomach twisting so badly, I thought I might throw up right there. My training officer didn't flinch. He just knelt down, checked the man even though it was obvious, and then stood up again like it was another day at work. For him, maybe it was. For me, it felt like the ground had just been ripped out from under me. We covered the body and waited for the coroner. The wife stood outside, wringing her hands, pacing the porch. I couldn't bring myself to look her in the eyes. I knew what had happened inside, and I knew I'd never be able to tell her about that sound. It wasn't something you could explain anyway. She'd lost her husband, and that was already more pain than anyone deserved. I stood off to the side, staring at the gravel, trying to steady my breathing, trying to act like I wasn't falling apart inside. Eventually, the coroner came, and things went the way they always do. Paperwork, photographs, the routine that strips something so personal down into procedure. My training officer handled most of it, talking with the coroner, answering questions, guiding the process. I just stood there numb, going through the motions when I had to, nodding when someone spoke to me, but barely hearing the words. My mind kept replaying that moment, the weight of him collapsing on me, that awful sound tearing out of him, my own scream, the way I dropped him. It looped over and over, and I couldn't shut it off. When it was finally over, we drove back in silence. My training officer lit a cigarette, cracked the window, and smoked like it was any other shift. I stared out at the fields, the trees, the gray sky that hadn't changed since morning. The world looked the same, but I didn't feel the same. I felt like something had been carved into me, something I'd never be able to scrape out. I didn't say a word the whole ride back, and neither did he. Maybe he knew there was nothing he could say that would help. Maybe he knew I just had to sit with it. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, his neck stretched, his ankles swollen. I felt the weight of him in my arms again, heard that moan echoing in my head. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, my chest tight, my stomach heavy. I felt guilty for screaming, guilty for dropping him, guilty for being shaken when it wasn't even my family. But most of all, I felt bad for him and for his wife, for what they'd gone through, for the way it ended. He'd been sick, dying slowly, and this was the choice he made. I didn't know if it was courage or desperation, but I knew it was pain. And now that pain had spilled over onto her, onto me, onto the silence of that barn. With time, I saw more. More deaths, more accidents, more things that chip away at you until you either harden or break. But nothing ever stayed with me like that first one. Nothing ever sounded the way that moan did. Nothing ever made me feel so unprepared, so raw, so human in a job that's supposed to demand steadiness. It taught me fast that the hardest part of this work isn't the danger, it isn't the long hours or the paperwork. It's the weight of moments like that, the ones you carry long after the scene is cleared, the ones that don't let go no matter how much you try to bury them. Even now, years later, if I walk into an old barn and the air is still, I can almost hear it again, that sound rushing out into the silence, the echo of something I wish I'd never heard but know I'll never forget. It's part of me now, whether I want it or not. And that's the thing about this job. You think you're there to carry other people's burdens, to shoulder the weight for them. But sometimes, without warning, that weight slips off and lands on you, and once it's there, it never really goes away. I never thought the place I worked at would end up destroying me. I went into that job like anyone else, just trying to make a living, just trying to show up and get through the hours, collect the paycheck, and go home. I wasn't the kind of guy who looked for trouble. I kept my head down, I worked hard, and I stayed in my own lane. That's how I always tried to be. But none of that mattered. None of that saved me. The worst part is, The people who hurt me are still there. Still walking the halls. Still laughing, still wearing their uniforms, still acting like nothing ever happened, while I wake up every day in a body and mind that will never be the same. It started small. It always does. At first it was just little things, remarks, jokes, the kind of crap you brush off because you don't want to be that guy who complains about everything. I remember one of the guys in the crew. He was always loud, always in your face, and he thought it was funny to mess with me. At first it was shoving in the hallway, a slap on the back that was just a little too hard, stuff that made you stop for a second but you laughed it off. Because that's what you do in places like that. You pretend it's all just a joke, even when it doesn't feel like one. But it escalated. One day we were in the garage, checking equipment, and he cornered me. No audience that time. He shoved me against the wall hard enough that I hit my shoulder, and it jolted through me. He was laughing like it was some game, like hurting me was entertainment. I remember my face getting hot, my fists curling, but I didn't do anything. I froze. That moment sticks in my head, because I keep asking myself why I didn't fight back. The truth is, I thought if I played along, if I didn't make it a big deal, it would stop. It never stopped. Every shift after that, I dreaded being around him. I knew something was coming. Sometimes it was a punch to the arm, so hard I couldn't lift it right for days. Sometimes it was getting shoved down when no one was looking. He did it quick, like he had practiced ways to humiliate me without getting caught. I started to realize he liked the fear. He liked knowing I didn't know when or how he'd come at me. That's when the job stopped being a job. It became survival. And then came the chief. A man who was supposed to protect me, supposed to lead us, supposed to make sure the workplace was safe. I never trusted him fully, but I respected the position. That respect was my biggest mistake. After one incident where I got hurt worse than usual, I thought I had to say something. I thought if I went to the top, if I told the chief what was going on, something would be done. I was nervous, but I went into his office. I remember the way he leaned back in his chair, watching me like he already knew what I was going to say. I told him everything. The shoving, the bruises, the way I was being targeted. He listened, but not in the way someone listens when they care. It was like he was sizing me up. He didn't take notes, didn't ask questions, just stared at me like a predator waiting for his chance. I walked out of that room thinking maybe I'd made a mistake. I was right. After that, the chief treated me differently. He'd find excuses to keep me after hours, call me into his office for things that didn't matter. The first time he crossed the line, it shocked me so bad I couldn't even process it. I won't go into the details, but it wasn't just words. It wasn't just threats. It was him using his power, his position, his control to take something from me I never gave. I remember every second of it, but I try not to let my mind replay it too clearly. What I can say is that moment shattered me. If the assault from my coworker had been breaking me slowly, this was the final blow. After that, I stopped being me. I stopped sleeping. I stopped eating. I couldn't walk into that building without shaking. I felt dirty in my own skin, like I was carrying around a secret no one would believe. And the truth is, no one did believe me. I went through the channels, I tried to report it, but the walls closed in fast. My coworker was still there, smirking at me every chance he got. The chief carried on like nothing happened, like he hadn't torn my life apart. People whispered that I was making things up, that I was weak, that I couldn't handle the job. Eventually my body gave out. The stress, the anxiety, the trauma, it wrecked me from the inside. I couldn't work anymore. The doctors said I was unfit for duty. Medically retired. That's the nice way of saying they chewed me up and spat me out, and now I'm left with the pieces. I sit at home now, day after day, trying to find ways to quiet my mind. But the silence is its own kind of torture. I replay everything over and over, wishing I had done something different, wishing I had fought back, wishing I had never walked into that office. I keep thinking about how they're still there, how the man who shoved me into walls is still laughing with the crew, and how the chief who violated me is still in his office, still in charge, still in uniform. That knowledge eats at me more than the memories sometimes, because it means nothing has changed. It means the system works for them, not for me. The scariest part isn't what happened. The scariest part is knowing that it can happen again. To someone else. Maybe someone younger, someone more trusting, someone who won't survive it the way I barely did. And I can't stop it. I'm outside now. They made sure of that. I try to find closure, but closure doesn't come when the story doesn't end. My story is frozen in place, stuck at the moment I walked out of that building for the last time, broken, humiliated, and discarded. I tell myself I got out alive, that surviving is something, that breathing is something. But most nights, when the memories come rushing back and I can't stop shaking, I wonder if I really did survive. This is the ending I live with. I'm alive, but I'm not the same. I lost the career I worked for. I lost the trust one had in people. I lost the belief that the system protects the innocent. The men who hurt me are still in uniforms, still shaking hands, still wearing smiles, while I sit in the dark, trying to remember who I used to be. That's the reality. That's the horror. Not a ghost in the woods, not a shadow in the corner, but real men with real power, who can ruin your life and walk away untouched. And that truth will always be scarier than anything else. I still remember that call as if it happened yesterday, though it's been years since that shift. Some jobs you attend blend together, routine checks or welfare visits that never stick in the mind. But others cut so deep into your memory that you know they'll never leave. This was one of those. It was late morning, bright outside, a day where everything seemed normal. I was partnered up with a colleague, just a standard shift. The call came through from dispatch that a woman hadn't been seen for some time. She lived alone with her dogs. Neighbors hadn't seen her out walking them or collecting her post. No one had answered the door. It wasn't unusual. We get welfare checks like that fairly often. 9 times out of 10, it's nothing serious, just someone who forgot to tell people they were away for a few days. But this one was different, though of course, we didn't know that yet. We pulled up outside the property, a modest detached house on a quiet street. The front garden was overgrown, grass long and scruffy, weeds pushing through the paving stones. Mail was stacked up in the letterbox, some of it spilling onto the floor inside the door. The curtains were all closed, and though it was daytime, the house gave off that still, heavy feeling. The kind of silence you can sense before you even go in. We knocked. No answer. We banged louder, calling out, but still nothing. The only sound was movement inside, scratching, pacing. Dogs. More than one, from the noise of it. That was when my stomach sank a little, because I'd been to calls like this before. Dogs locked inside, too long with no one to care for them. It never ends well. We had no choice but to force entry. My colleague did the honors, shoulder to the door, and with a crack and splinter of wood it gave way. The moment it opened, the dogs were right there, 3 of them, medium-sized but strong, barking, whining, circling. Their nails scratched across the flooring, their eyes wide and frantic. You could smell them before you even registered anything else. The whole house carried that thick, acrid scent of animals kept shut in too long. Urine, feces, damp fur. I held out a hand, tried to calm them, but they weren't aggressive, more desperate, confused, restless. You could tell they hadn't been outside in days. We stepped in cautiously. The air was heavy and close, stale like it hadn't been moved in weeks. All the curtains were drawn, the daylight only creeping in around the edges. The dogs darted around us, back and forth, their bodies tense, tails tucked down, heads snapping between us and somewhere deeper in the house. They wanted us to follow, that much was clear. We began our search, moving from room to room. Kitchen first, mess everywhere. Bowls overturned, floor covered in stains. The fridge door was slightly open, empty inside. It looked like the dogs had managed to get it open at some point and licked it clean. Food wrappers shredded on the ground, the remains of what they'd scavenged. The air had that rotten undertone you only smell when food has sat too long. Upstairs, the bedrooms were untouched, beds still made, everything in its place. No sign of her. It was quiet, except for the sound of the dogs padding along behind us, panting, whining. It wasn't until we stepped into the living room that everything changed. At first, it was just clutter, magazines on the coffee table, cushions on the floor, the usual lived-in mess. But then my eyes caught something at the far side of the room. On the couch, right in the middle, there was an object sticking upright, tall and narrow. The light wasn't great, so at first I squinted, trying to figure it out. My brain couldn't quite place it. It looked unnatural but familiar. I thought it was maybe an arm, sticking straight up into the air, stiff and pale. I remember circling around it slowly, my boots crunching lightly on debris on the carpet. The dogs hovered at the edge of the room, watching. It was only when I got to the other side that I realized what I was actually seeing. It wasn't an arm. It was the spine, the woman's spine, upright, exposed, sticking up out of what was left of her torso. My stomach dropped. For a few seconds, I couldn't move, couldn't even breathe. It didn't register properly, not at first, because it was so wrong, so beyond what you expect to see. Her body had been torn apart. Most of the midsection was gone entirely. The skin that remained was stretched thin, connecting the upper torso to what was left of her legs, which had been pulled close, folded unnaturally toward the head. The way it had collapsed made the spine jet upward like some grotesque pillar, naked and stripped. I could see where teeth had been, where flesh had once been. It was horrific. There's no other word for it. I had seen sudden deaths before, suicides, accidents, even decompositions, but this was something else. This was raw animal. The human body broken down into something unrecognizable, something meat-like, stripped of the dignity it once had. I forced myself to take in the details, because that was the job. The skin on her arms was ragged, gnawed down. Her face was partly intact but sunken, lips gone, nose chewed. Her eyes stared out empty, one missing altogether. Her clothes were shredded and stiff, dried with fluids. The carpet beneath was soaked dark with patches that had dried sticky and others that were still damp. The smell sharp and coppery, even through the stench of the dogs. I backed away slowly, but there was nowhere else to look. The whole room told the story. The dogs had been shut inside for days, maybe longer, with no food, no water except what they could lap from toilets or lick from the floor. Survival had taken over. They had turned to her. It wasn't malice, not aggression, just desperation. But the result was something I'll never forget. We did what we had to. Secured the dogs, called it in. The process took time. More colleagues arrived, animal control came to remove the dogs, a van came for the remains. I tried to focus on the work, on the professionalism of it, but the image burned itself deeper every time I looked. That spine sticking up in the middle of the couch. That was the worst of it. It was so unnatural, so wrong, like a grotesque sculpture. Even when I turned away, I could see it behind my eyelids. Eventually, we wrapped up. The scene was photographed, documented. No signs of foul play. It was classified as a sudden death, nothing suspicious. Just a woman who had died alone, with only her animals for company, and the terrible reality of what happened after. A cleaning crew was arranged. They'd be the ones to scrub away the stains, to clear out the air, to make the house something habitable again. For us, it was another job closed, another case done. At least that's what I tried to tell myself. But just as we were leaving, standing by the car, something nagged at both of us. We went back over the scene in our heads. The remains we'd seen, what had been bagged, what had been carried out. And that's when we realized there was no pelvis. We'd accounted for the upper torso, the legs, the arms. But the pelvis was missing. It wasn't on the couch, not on the floor, not dragged into a corner. Gone. And the realization sank in, heavy and certain. The dogs had consumed it. Not just chewed, not just stripped, completely consumed, bones and all. Nothing left. We went back in to be sure. Walked through the rooms again, retracing steps. The smell was worse now that the air had shifted, but the house was quiet, empty without the dogs. We searched under furniture, checked every corner. Nothing. No trace of the pelvis anywhere. It was gone. I tried not to picture it too vividly, but the truth was unavoidable. They had eaten it whole, broken it down piece by piece, until nothing remained. We left again, and this time we didn't go back. The cleaning crew would come, the house would be restored, the neighbors would gossip for a while before moving on. For us, it became another file closed. But the details of that day never left me. The smell of the house, the pacing of the dogs, that upright spine on the couch, and the knowledge that hunger had driven them so far that a whole part of her body had been consumed without trace. Even now, years later, if I close my eyes too long, I can see it all again. Not the way a person should be remembered, not the way life should end, just a body torn down by the very animals it once cared for, and the silence that followed when it was all over. That silence is the part that sticks the most. Because once we left, the house was empty, and she was gone, and only the memory of what we found remained. And that's what I carry with me every day since. When I think back to the calls that stuck with me most, there's one that always comes up in my head first. It wasn't because of danger or some violent crime scene, or even the kind of chaos that usually comes with police work. It was quieter than that, slower, heavier. A welfare check call. The type of call that on paper seems straightforward, but in reality carries a certain weight you don't understand until you're standing in the middle of it. It came in during an afternoon shift, one of those long stretches where time drags and you're just waiting for something to break the monotony. The dispatcher's voice came over the radio, calm but with that undertone that tells you there's more to it than the simple words. Welfare check, elderly male, family out of state, hasn't heard from him in several days. They've been trying to call, no answer. They want us to check and confirm. If there's no answer, they authorize entry. I remember glancing over at my partner as soon as I heard it. We didn't need to say anything. We both knew. Calls like this almost never end with someone just being asleep. The drive over was quiet. The sun was still up, hanging high, that sort of dull, hazy warmth of late afternoon. It was one of those moments where everything around you, cars moving, people out mowing their lawns, kids riding bikes, kept moving like normal, but in your head you already started preparing for the heaviness that was about to come. I kept thinking about the family, whoever had made the call from out of state. They probably had some feeling already. Maybe they called every day and knew his patterns. Maybe they tried for hours until their gut told them something was wrong. It's strange, being the in-between person for something like that. You're not family. You don't have the personal connection. But you're the one who has to walk up, open the door, and see what's left. We pulled up to the house, an older single-story place in a quiet neighborhood. The lawn was overgrown, not like it had been months, but clearly neglected for a couple weeks at least. The mailbox was stuffed to the brim, letters and flyers wedged tight, some sticking out. Newspapers were scattered near the porch, weather-warped and yellowed. Those little details are always the first signs. They tell you what you're about to find without needing to go inside. We knocked on the front door first, like we always do. No answer. Knocked again, louder, called out. Nothing. My partner tried the door, but it was locked. We circled the house, checking windows. All closed, curtains drawn. No movement inside. That's when we noticed the garage door. It was shut, but with authorization from the family, we had enough to enter. We got the door open, and that's when it really started. The air hit me before anything else. Not a sharp smell yet, but something stale, thick, something wrong. The garage was packed. I'm talking floor to ceiling, wall to wall junk. Old tools, boxes, broken furniture, piles of bags, newspapers stacked in unstable towers, a path just barely wide enough for one person to shuffle through. The sight of it alone already set something in my stomach twisting. Houses like this usually tell you two things. The person was isolated, and when someone lives like that, it usually means no one's been inside for a long while. We stepped in, one after the other, moving slow because there was hardly room to move at all. Each step made the floor creak and little clouds of dust rise up. The smell deepened the further we went. I've smelled death before. It's one of those things that sticks with you forever. The second I caught that note under everything else, sweet, sickly, unmistakable, I knew. My partner knew too. Neither of us said it, but we both slowed down. Inside the door to the house, the path continued. The kitchen, or what I think used to be the kitchen, was nothing but narrow walkways between mountains of trash. Food containers, empty cans, old mail, bags of who knows what, stacked everywhere. The air was heavy and hard to breathe. That smell, mixed with old garbage and dust, made every breath burn in the back of my throat. I could hear the faint hum of flies somewhere deeper in the house. We kept moving, step after step, careful not to bump into piles that looked like they'd collapse if you touched them wrong. The living room wasn't any better. Faded furniture covered in junk, papers on the floor so thick it was like walking on layers of carpet. The curtains were drawn, the air stagnant, the only light coming from the small beams slipping through cracks in the blinds. It felt like time had been stopped inside this house years ago, like no one had opened a window or let air in for decades. The further we went, the stronger the smell got. It was everywhere now, impossible to escape, clinging to my clothes, to my skin. My stomach turned, but you just push forward because that's the job. I kept my eyes scanning corners, half expecting to see him slumped somewhere. We finally reached the hallway that led toward the bedrooms. That's when I knew we were getting close. The buzzing of flies was louder, the air thicker. My boots stuck slightly to the floor with each step, like something had leaked or spilled long ago. The master bedroom door was partly open. My partner nudged it the rest of the way, and the dim light revealed what we had come for. There he was. The man sat in a rocking chair near the window, his body still dressed in clothes, slumped at an angle that was so unnatural it made my chest tighten just looking at it. His upper body had leaned far over to the right, almost at a perfect 90 degrees, like someone had bent him that way deliberately. Only, I knew it wasn't deliberate. His spine had given out post-mortem. No muscle, no tension left to hold him straight. His body had simply folded. The sight of him like that was worse than any wound or injury I'd seen. Death is one thing when you expect it, when you see it in natural positions. But when the body twists in ways the living body can't, it unsettles you to your core. His face was darkened, skin pulled tight, features hard to recognize as human at first glance. The smell was overwhelming in that room, almost solid, like it had weight. Flies moved across him, circling, landing, taking off again. For a moment, I just stood there, taking it in. I'd found bodies before. I'd seen scenes worse in different ways. But this one stuck. Something about the quiet, the way he sat in that rocking chair like he might have just been resting before everything shut down. The way the house closed in around him, packed with years of isolation, junk stacked like walls. And that bend, his torso leaning, spine broken after death, made the whole picture so unnatural it froze in my mind like a photograph. We went through the motions, confirmed, called it in. The process took over, the routine steps. Secure the scene, wait for investigators, coroner, whoever needed to come. But the longer I stayed in that house, the heavier it got. Every object around me told a story of someone who had lived alone for a long time, slowly closing themselves off from the world until there was nothing left but piles of stuff and silence. Standing there, I couldn't help but think of the family out of state, the ones who hadn't heard from him. Maybe they pictured him sitting in a chair reading, or sleeping in bed, peaceful. They probably weren't ready for the truth of how it really ended, in a room full of stale air and buzzing flies, his body leaning unnaturally as the house held on to him in its cluttered arms. When the coroner finally arrived and we stepped outside, the fresh air hit me like a wall. I hadn't realized how badly I needed it. The smell clung to me, to my uniform, to my hair. I knew it would follow me home, and it did. Even after a shower, it lingered in my memory, the kind of thing you catch faint whiffs of in places it doesn't belong. We cleared the call, filed the report, and went back to patrol. The rest of the shift moved on like nothing had happened, but in the back of my mind, it was all I could see. That bent figure in the rocking chair, that house full of pathways carved through years of loneliness. The silence that hung heavy over it all. It's been years since that call, but even now, when I drive through certain neighborhoods and see a house with a stuffed mailbox or curtains drawn for too long, I think about him. I think about how easy it is for someone to vanish quietly, how long it takes before anyone notices. And I think about how unnatural that bend looked, how it didn't take trauma or violence, just time and decay. That's the part that stays with you. Not the paperwork, not the official cause, not even the smell. It's the picture you carry, the last image of someone's life frozen in a way that doesn't let go. And no matter how many years pass, I can still see that room every time I close my eyes. I still remember that day like it happened an hour ago. It wasn't just another call. I'd only been on the job for 3 months, still learning the ropes, still figuring out how to handle the things I was seeing. And then I walked into that house. I didn't know at the time how much it would stick to me, how much it would burn itself into my head. But some things have a way of forcing themselves to stay no matter how badly you want to shake them loose. The call came in the middle of a normal shift. Nothing too unusual that day. I'd had a couple of routine things, stuff that didn't make your stomach turn. I was still new, so everything felt a little heavier to me than it probably did to the others, but I was starting to settle into it. That's the part that eats at me sometimes. I was just starting to feel like I belonged, like I could do the work without freezing up, and then I got that call. The dispatch didn't make it sound like anything more than what it was, a welfare check. Someone hadn't been heard from, maybe in a bad way, maybe not. I remember driving there with the window cracked, the cool air drifting in. It was one of those ordinary afternoons that don't give you any warning. The kind where the world looks normal, calm, like nothing could possibly go sideways. The house was small, quiet street, nothing out of place. A car in the driveway. A couple of kids' bikes tossed in the yard. I walked up expecting the usual. Knock, call out, maybe someone answers, maybe not. I didn't know yet how fast a normal-looking place could turn into a nightmare the moment you stepped inside. I opened the door, and at first, it didn't register. The entryway looked fine, though there was a strange smell in the air. I couldn't place it right away. It wasn't until later that I realized how distinct it really was, how your body remembers it even more than your mind does. A smell like metal and rot, sharp enough to sting the back of your throat, but heavy enough to sit in your chest. I stepped further inside, scanning, trying to get a sense of things. That's when I noticed the floor. At first glance, I thought it was just pieces of plastic or maybe trash scattered around. Small jagged chunks, a little shiny under the dim light. I bent down without thinking, and that's when my stomach turned. It wasn't plastic. It wasn't anything that belonged in a house. It was flesh. Flesh and muscle, blown apart in pieces so small they barely looked human. The kind of fragments that your brain refuses to accept at first. You look at them and you try to convince yourself it's something else, anything else, because the alternative doesn't fit in your head. But I knew. I knew even before I turned the corner. I hesitated before moving forward, like part of me wanted to leave the pieces where they were, like maybe if I didn't see the rest, I could go back to thinking it was just another house, just another call. But my feet carried me anyway, heavy, each step sticking to the floor. I turned the corner, and there he was. The man sat slumped, shotgun still clutched in his hand, the other side of his head nearly gone. The walls were painted with what was left of him. Blood, tissue, bone, dripping down like someone had thrown buckets of paint across the room. The force of it had scattered him across everything, the ceiling, the curtains, even the lampshade. His face barely looked like a face anymore. The mess was so violent that my brain couldn't process it fast enough. I just stood there, frozen, staring at something I didn't think I'd ever see. Training doesn't prepare you for that. Movies don't prepare you for that. Nothing does. It was too real, too raw. You could feel the silence in the room, a silence so heavy it felt like the house itself was holding its breath. I remember looking at his hands, how tightly he was still gripping the shotgun. I remember staring at his shoes, weird little details that my brain latched onto because it couldn't handle the bigger picture. One shoelace was untied. There was a scuff mark on the toe of one boot. Details like that somehow made it worse, because they reminded me that this was a real man, someone who had put his shoes on that morning like it was just another day. Then my eyes drifted back to the floor by the door, and it clicked. Those plastic pieces I'd stepped over were him. They were chunks of him that had blown apart when he pulled the trigger. The realization hit harder than anything else. My stomach flipped, my throat burned, and for a moment I thought I was going to lose it right there on the carpet. And then, as I was still trying to steady myself, I saw the note. It was sitting on the table, folded neat, like it had been placed there with care. Outside, on the porch, was a bag of mail, almost like he'd wanted to make sure it was found. It wasn't random. It wasn't sudden. He'd planned this. Later, I found out why. The man had done it because of his soon-to-be ex-wife. He wanted her to be the one to find him. He'd written it out. He'd staged it. He wanted to make sure it cut her in the deepest way possible. But the cruelest part of it all wasn't the scene, wasn't even the fact that he left it for her. It was the timing. That night was his stepdaughter's prom. She was supposed to be dressing up, laughing with friends, taking pictures, not dealing with this. But that was the night he chose. When I told her what had happened, she broke for a moment, cried like any kid would. But then, almost as quickly, she stopped. Her face hardened in a way I'd never seen before, and she said words I'll never forget. He did this on purpose to hurt me. And she was right. That was the part that's impossible to let go of. He didn't just end his life. He turned it into a weapon. He made sure it wasn't just about him. He made sure it would scar the people around him, make them carry it forever. He aimed his pain outward like shrapnel, so everyone close to him had to bleed too. I carried the weight of that house with me long after I left. The smell clung to my clothes. The images replayed every time I shut my eyes. I scrubbed my hands even though I hadn't touched anything, because it felt like the blood had seeped into my skin. That night I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, every detail sharp and clear, like I was still standing in that room. The untied shoelace, the fragments on the floor, the soundless scream that seemed to hang in the air long after I walked out. You think time will dull it, but it doesn't. At least, not completely. You go on, you keep working, you see other things, but certain calls stick deeper than others. This one carved itself into me. Every time I drive past that street, I can picture the house. Every time I smell something metallic, I'm back in that entryway. I've seen a lot more since then. More bodies, more wreckage, more scenes that people shouldn't have to see. You build walls around it. You learn to keep it in a box somewhere in the back of your head. But sometimes the box breaks open, and this call always spills out first. Because it wasn't just about death. It was about cruelty. About someone deciding not just to end their life, but to do it in a way that guaranteed everyone else would carry it. About a girl in a prom dress forced to face something she should never have had to. About me, 3 months on the job, forced to understand in one afternoon just how dark people can be when they decide to take everyone else down with them. That's the part that keeps me up. That's the part that made me realize this job isn't about what you see. It's about what stays with you afterward. And no matter how many years pass, no matter how many other scenes I walk into, I'll never forget the feel of that house, the smell in the air, or the sound of her voice when she said the truth out loud. He didn't just kill himself, he made sure the wound spread. And that's something you can never scrub away. I remember that night like it happened yesterday, even though it's been years since I wore the uniform. At the time, I was military police, and my shift had just started. Like every evening, the first thing I did was head out to my assigned patrol car and begin my checks. That routine became second nature after a while. Walk around the car, make sure the lights worked, check the trunk for all the issued gear, ensure the radar was functioning, make sure I had a full tank of gas. It was muscle memory, but I never skipped steps. Out there, especially at night, one small mistake could snowball into something big. The air was cold that night, sharp enough that you could see your breath drift away in the glow of the lot lights. The base was quiet, the kind of quiet you only get during shift change. Patrols from the day shift were coming back, turning in their radios and keys, and the night shift was gearing up, stretching, and shaking off the fatigue that came with late hours. You could always feel that shift change energy, a mix of tired voices saying goodnight and fresh ones preparing for what might come. I had my hood pulled up under my cover, rubbing my hands together to keep the blood flowing as I leaned into the driver's side window, calibrating my radar. It was routine, but it required focus. The hum of the system was a familiar sound, a steady reassurance that the equipment was ready for whatever came our way. That's when the radio broke the silence. Dispatch's voice cut through with urgency, sharp enough that it made me freeze mid-motion. They reported a man with a gun walking toward the main gate. No hesitation in their voice, no uncertainty, just straight facts. My stomach tightened immediately, and I looked up from my car, glancing across the lot to one of my partners. He was standing by his own patrol car, and when our eyes met, we didn't need words. We gave each other that look, the kind that said everything in a split second. This was serious, this could go bad fast. Without another thought, we both jumped into our patrol cars, engines roaring to life as we threw the vehicles into gear. I stomped the accelerator, and the tires crunched against the gravel before gripping the pavement. My eyes flicked to the speedometer as I shot down the road, the needle climbing past 60, then 70, then close to 90 miles per hour. My heart was already racing faster than the car, and I kept my hands tight on the wheel, the weight of my gear belt pressing against my hip as I leaned forward, focused on the road ahead. The main gate came into view quickly, the floodlights casting long white beams across the pavement and illuminating the soldiers on duty. I slowed just enough to roll my window down, and one of the soldiers standing there, still checking IDs as cars trickled through, jerked his head toward the road off base. He didn't even speak, just pointed. His face told me enough. The road outside the gate was technically still military property, even though it led toward town. That stretch of asphalt, from the gate to the traffic light up ahead, had always felt like a sort of gray zone. The public could use it, but jurisdiction was still ours. I hit the gas again, my headlights cutting a bright path in the darkness as I pushed down the road. My partner wasn't far behind, his headlights bouncing in my mirrors. The whole drive, my mind was racing almost as fast as the car. I couldn't shake the thought of Fort Hood, the active shooter incident that had burned itself into the back of every soldier's mind, or the bomb plot that had nearly made it onto our base less than a year before. Those thoughts weighed heavy. For all I knew, we were about to pull up on someone ready to shoot at anyone in sight, or worse. Every worst-case scenario I'd ever been trained for was spinning in my head, and my adrenaline was already flowing like I was running into a firefight. Then, in the beam of my headlights, I saw him. A lone figure walking down the road, shoulders hunched against the cold. I flicked on my spotlight, swinging the beam directly onto him. That's when I saw it. The glint, the shine of metal reflecting back at me from his hand. My foot slammed down on the brake pedal, the car lurching to a stop hard enough to throw me forward in my seatbelt. I threw the gear shift into park and was out the door in seconds, pistol drawn, arms locked, heart pounding in my ears. My voice came out louder than I expected, carried by adrenaline and fear. I barked commands, telling him to show his hands, to put them in the air. The guy froze, his body stiffening under the spotlight. I could see his hands trembling as he raised them, something still gripped in one of them. My eyes stayed locked on that object, waiting for him to swing it toward me, waiting for the flash of a muzzle, waiting for the moment everything broke loose. But as I edged forward, weapon still trained, the shape became clearer. It wasn't a pistol. It wasn't a rifle. It was a thermos. A damn thermos. The reflection I'd seen had been nothing more than metal catching the beam of my light. My partner rolled up fast, stepping out with his own weapon drawn, backing me up. I didn't lower my pistol immediately. I couldn't, not until I was absolutely sure. My partner moved in, holstered, and patted the guy down while I held my position. Nothing. No weapons. No threat. Just a man with a thermos, standing in the cold, probably scared out of his mind with two MPs pointing guns at him. I finally holstered my sidearm, my chest heaving as the adrenaline drained away, leaving me with that shaky, hollow feeling that always follows. My partner gave me the nod, confirming what I already knew. The guy was clean. No weapons, no threat, just an unfortunate misunderstanding. Someone had driven past, seen the shine of the thermos in his hand, and reported it as a gun. Relief hit me like a wave, but so did guilt. I walked the guy over to my patrol car, told him to sit in the passenger seat while I filled out the paperwork. The night air was biting, and he didn't have much more than a thin jacket on. Sitting in the car was better than standing in the cold, and it gave me a chance to talk to him, to calm both of us down a little. He told me he was walking because he'd lost his license after a DUI. He worked as a janitor at one of the schools on base, and he was just heading home. I couldn't stop apologizing to him. My heart was still hammering, but I knew his probably was too, and for a different reason. He had no idea how close he'd just come to getting shot, all because of a reflection and a hasty report. I filled out the incident paperwork, wrote down the details, logged the call, the whole process. But as I sat there writing, I kept glancing at him out of the corner of my eye. He was quiet, looking straight ahead, probably just wanting the whole thing to be over. I thought about how, in a different split second, this story could have ended in the worst way possible. That night stuck with me. It was funny later, sure, we all laughed about the thermos incident eventually, but in the moment it was terrifying. I really believed I was about to step into a gunfight, that I was about to be another headline, another story whispered around the barracks. For those few seconds, my brain was already braced for the sound of gunfire and the feel of recoil. It taught me a lesson I never forgot, how fast something could spiral out of control, how quickly a harmless man with a thermos could be mistaken for an armed threat, how a single reflection could flip a switch in my head from calm to full-on survival mode, and how close I came, in those tense seconds, to pulling the trigger on an innocent man. When my shift finally ended and I turned in my gear, the base was as quiet as it had been when it started. But I drove home that morning with my hands still trembling on the wheel. The image of that thermos burned into my memory. It reminded me every day after that just how thin the line was between routine and disaster, between calm and chaos. Even now, long after I've left the uniform behind, I think about that night. Not because it was funny, but because it scared me in a way few things ever have. It was real, it was raw, and it was a reminder of just how fast life can turn on you when you least expect it. I still remember the way the call came over the radio that night, the kind of crackle in the dispatcher's voice that made you sit up straighter, even if you'd been dead tired. It was late, one of those endless shifts in the county, where you never really knew if you were going to be sitting at a desk for hours staring at blank walls, or flying down a rural road to something you'd never forget. The words were short, clipped, the usual language they use for a motor vehicle accident. Single car off the roadway, possible injuries, unknown condition of the driver. The location was a stretch of county blacktop I knew well, 2 miles past a dairy farm, long straights and sudden curves that had chewed up more cars than I could count. I drove out with that dull hum in my chest, the kind that comes when adrenaline hasn't caught up with reality yet. The road was quiet, only the glow of my headlights cutting through the dark. When I finally saw the fence torn apart, wood splintered out across the ditch, I slowed down. My spotlight swung over the scene, and the car came into view. It had plowed through the fence and rolled at least 3 times, maybe more judging by the churned earth and broken posts scattered across the pasture. It had landed right side up, but the roof was flattened in spots and the glass was shattered out of every window. I parked a little ways off and stepped out. The air was heavy and damp, the smell of dirt and coolant mixed with the faint metallic tang of blood. My boots crunched over broken glass as I walked closer. The car was quiet, too quiet, no movement inside, no groans, no sound at all. My flashlight beam slid across the interior, and that's when I saw him. The driver. He was slumped against the wheel, his body twisted at an unnatural angle, his face pale and smeared with blood. I wasn't alone long. Within minutes, the paramedic unit rolled in, red lights washing over the fence and pasture like waves. They moved in fast, checked him the way they always did, one on the airway, one on the pulse, hands working in practiced silence. I stood back, giving them space, but I caught the look one of them gave me. The kind of look that didn't need words. It was the look that said he was gone. The medic leaned back finally, pulling off his gloves. He said it flat, no hesitation, the driver was deceased. I'd seen enough scenes to know they don't make that call lightly. You could see the way his chest wasn't rising, the way his skin already looked waxy in the beam of the flashlight. It sat heavy in my gut, the finality of it. We secured the scene, set up flares, kept traffic back though there wasn't much out there this time of night. A deputy arrived not long after, and together we just did what you do, the rote tasks that keep your hands busy even when your mind drifts. The coroner was called, and it was just a waiting game until he showed up. When the coroner finally arrived, the man was calm, practiced, moving with the kind of steadiness you only see in people who've done this far too often. He went straight to the car, flashlight in hand, camera hanging from his neck, gloves snapping on. He leaned in, took his time, checked what he needed to check, and declared the driver dead. Just like the medic had said, there was no argument, no uncertainty. He started his documentation, snapping photos, jotting down notes, working with that quiet efficiency. The rest of us gathered near his van, about 20 feet from the wreck. The night was still, only the faint chirp of insects in the pasture, the distant low of a cow somewhere beyond the broken fence. Our voices were low, talking about the crash, about how fast the guy must have been going, about how the curve had probably taken him by surprise. It wasn't anything unusual, just the sad, routine talk that fills the silence while you stand around waiting for a body bag to be zipped up. And then it happened. It was so ordinary in the seconds before that it made what came next feel unreal. One moment we were standing there in the wash of the coroner van's headlights, sipping burnt coffee from a thermos, and the next there was movement in the corner of my eye. I turned, and I swear my heart stopped cold. The driver sat up, not slowly, not like a twitch, but upright, his torso rising out of that crumpled posture in the seat. His head rolled a little before steadying, his eyes blinking open, his face turning side to side like he was taking in where he was. I heard someone's breath hitch hard beside me, and every hair on my arm stood on end. My feet moved before my brain did, stumbling back a couple steps, my heart slamming, so hard I thought I was going to drop right there in the grass. Then, as if the scene hadn't already been turned upside down, his hand came up, found the ignition, and he turned the key. The engine coughed, sputtered, and then roared to life. The car, mangled and broken as it was, sat there rumbling in the dark like nothing had happened. I don't think any of us spoke. Not a word. We just stood there, every muscle locked, our brains trying to reconcile what we were seeing. We had watched the paramedics declare him gone. We had watched the coroner do the same. And now here he was, alive, sitting upright, staring at us with the blank confusion of someone waking from a nightmare. I could feel the blood pounding in my ears, the sick twist of fear and disbelief knotting my stomach. My hands were shaking, and I realized I'd taken another step back without meaning to. The night that had been so still was suddenly electric, every sound amplified, the idle of the engine, the crunch of gravel under someone shifting their boots. Even the insects seemed louder. The coroner, the man who had seen more dead bodies than I ever would in my life, looked as pale as I felt. His flashlight hung loose in his hand, the beam spilling across the grass as though he'd forgotten he was even holding it. The driver didn't speak. He just sat there breathing, shallow but steady, his chest rising and falling like it hadn't for the last half hour. His hands rested on the wheel, blood drying on his fingers, his face still a mask of cuts and swelling. But he was alive. The medics rushed back, disbelief still etched on their faces, but training taking over. They pulled him from the car carefully, set him down, checked vitals that should not have been there. The words strong pulse floated back to me, and I just stood there rooted, feeling like I was watching something impossible. I stayed on scene long after the ambulance pulled away, its lights fading into the dark distance. The pasture was quiet again, the car sitting there ruined but still smelling of heat and oil. The fence was broken, the grass flattened, the earth scarred by tires and rolls. All of it real, all of it proof of what had happened. And yet I couldn't shake the image of him sitting up, alive, when we had all believed he was gone. In the days that followed, there were questions. Reports to be written, statements to be made. How could two trained professionals, people who'd called countless deaths before, both declare a man dead when he wasn't? How could the signs have been so clear, and yet so wrong? There were meetings, investigations, quiet conversations in hallways. Words like agonal respirations and shallow pulses floated around, medical terms that tried to explain the unexplainable. But no matter what anyone said, no matter how many rational explanations were offered, the memory stayed burned in me. The sight of his body rising, the sound of that engine starting, the way the night split open and the world tilted sideways. Even now, years later, when I drive past that stretch of road, I can see it in my mind. The fence still broken, the car still sitting there, and the driver pulling himself upright against all odds. It wasn't a ghost story, it wasn't some nightmare. It was real as the earth under my boots and the air in my lungs. And it left me with one truth I'll never shake. Sometimes death isn't as final as we think. Sometimes the line between gone and alive is so thin you don't even realize when you've crossed it. And sometimes, if you're unlucky enough to be standing 20 feet away, you'll see that line blur with your own eyes. I still remember that call like it was yesterday. Even now, years later, the memory is burned into my mind with every detail sharp and heavy. I had been on the job long enough to know that most calls never went the way you pictured them. Dispatch could tell you one thing, but when you got there, you usually found a situation with 10 more layers than what came over the radio. Still, nothing could have really prepared me for that night. The call came in just as my shift was hitting that quiet lull, the part of the night where you're usually driving around, running plates, and thinking too much about how long until the sun comes up. It was dispatch, and their tone had that clipped edge that always makes your heart skip. Subject firing a shotgun inside his residence. Mother still on scene. Possibly intoxicated, possibly mental health crisis. I could feel my stomach tighten as I acknowledged. That's the kind of call where you know every second matters, and you know you might be walking into a nightmare. I clicked the lights and sirens and started moving. The city passed in a blur of dark shapes and streetlights. I'd been on plenty of calls with guns involved before, but there's a difference between someone brandishing one outside and someone locked in their own home with one. A house is their ground, their turf. They know every corner, every hallway. You're stepping into their world, not yours. It's the kind of situation where control is almost impossible, and you just try to stack the odds in your favor. As I pulled onto the street, I could already see the flashing red and blue reflecting against the houses. Another officer was pulling up from the other end of the block. Neighbors were standing on porches, craning their necks, phones out, that mix of curiosity and fear that always surrounds these things. I parked a few houses down and moved quick, scanning, making sure there wasn't anyone wandering around with a weapon outside. Then I saw her, his mother. She burst out of the house before I could even get to the front door, and the sound of her screaming hit me harder than the sirens. "He's in his room," she shouted, her voice cracked and panicked, hands flailing toward the door as if she wanted to drag us in herself. Her eyes were wide, glassy, and I could see she was barely hanging on to her own footing. I caught her by the arm, steadying her, trying to keep her from running back in. I told her to stay by my patrol car, told her to keep back no matter what she heard. She nodded frantically, but I could tell she wasn't really processing anything. She looked like she wanted to collapse and run all at once. I hated leaving her like that, but there wasn't a choice. The other officer and I locked eyes as we stacked up at the door. I was point. The air felt thick as soon as we stepped inside. It was a modest house, quiet except for the sound of our boots on the floor. My heart was hammering, but years of training kept my hands steady. We cleared the entryway, then the living room. Each step deeper into that house felt heavier, like walking through a fog you couldn't see, but could feel pressing against your skin. We made our way down the hallway. I could see the faint glow of a lamp spilling out from one of the rooms ahead. The rest of the house was dark. My body tensed as I got closer, the way it always does before you turn a blind corner. You never know what's waiting, and every instinct is screaming to hesitate, but hesitation can kill you in this job. I turned into the bedroom doorway, weapon up, scanning, and there he was. He was sitting in a chair, not more than 10 feet away, a shotgun resting casually across his lap. He wasn't aiming it at me, not yet, but it was there, solid and undeniable. He looked up at me with a face that didn't match the chaos of the call. His expression was calm, almost detached, like we were running into each other on the street instead of in this nightmare. He greeted me in a casual tone, like I was just another visitor. I knew him. I'd dealt with him before. A past arrest, a bad night, nothing out of the ordinary for the job. That familiarity only made it worse now. I kept my voice steady low, trying to keep the air in the room from igniting. I talked to him the way you talk to someone teetering on a ledge, knowing the wrong word, the wrong tone could tip them. My partner stayed behind me, weapon trained, ready to react if things turned. For a minute, it almost felt like maybe we were getting somewhere. He wasn't yelling, wasn't waving the gun. He was listening, even if his eyes had that far-off look. I kept trying to pull him back, keep him grounded. The seconds dragged like hours. Then he said it. Just 4 words that cut through the space like a blade. "Doesn't matter, thanks for trying though." His voice was soft, resigned, almost grateful. And before I could process, before I could even open my mouth, he moved. The shotgun came up, and in that split second I knew what was about to happen, but I couldn't stop it. The blast shook the room, deafening, the smell of gunpowder and something metallic flooding the air. He slumped instantly, the chair creaking, body collapsing under its own weight. It was over in an instant. My ears rang, my chest felt like it had been split open, and all I could do was stand there staring at the reality of what had just happened. The silence after was worse than the blast. My partner moved in, securing the weapon, checking, but we both knew. There was nothing to be done. He was gone before his body even hit the floor properly. I backed out slowly, my body heavy, my mind blank. When I stepped outside, his mother was still by my car. The moment she saw me, I didn't have to say a word. Her scream pierced the night, the kind of sound that claws at your bones and doesn't let go. I'll never forget that sound as long as I live. The rest of the night blurred. Supervisors arrived, detectives, crime scene, medical examiner. Statements were taken, the house swarmed. I went through the motions, but my mind was still back in that room, replaying the moment over and over, like if I replayed it enough I could find the one move, the one word, the one action that could have changed it. But there wasn't one. That's the hardest part. The helplessness. I'd faced danger before, faced people pointing guns at me, knives, fists. But nothing eats at you like watching someone take their own life right in front of you, and knowing there was nothing you could do to stop it. It's a different kind of wound, one that doesn't bleed but still leaves scars. For weeks after, I couldn't sleep without seeing his face in the corner of that room, hearing that last sentence in my head. "Doesn't matter, thanks for trying though." I heard it in the quiet, in the middle of conversations, even when I was just driving alone. I carried it with me, heavy and suffocating. Therapy helped. So did my family. Talking, opening up, letting myself admit how much it haunted me instead of trying to bury it. Cops aren't great at that. We're trained to push through, to compartmentalize. But you can't always box something like this away. It leaks out, whether you want it to or not. Over time, I've managed. The memory is still there, always will be. But it doesn't control me anymore. It's a scar, not an open wound. I still wear the badge, still put on the uniform, still answer the calls. Because at the end of the day, that's what we do. We show up, even when it's ugly, even when it's impossible, even when it breaks a piece of us inside. That night reminded me more than ever that this job isn't just about arrests or tickets or calls cleared. It's about people. Broken people, angry people, scared people. Sometimes we can help. Sometimes we can't. But we still have to try. Because sometimes trying is all we have to give. And I'll carry that memory with me for the rest of my life. Not as something that defines me, but as something that reminds me why I keep going, why I keep showing up, and why I'll never take for granted the chance to make a difference, even if it's just by trying.